Καλησπέρα. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ που είστε σήμερα μαζί μας. Θα συζητήσουμε για εμπειρίες που βίωσε η Ζντένκα Σοκολίτσκοβα στους μείον 20 βαθμούς στη βορειότερη κατοικημένη περιοχή του πλανήτη, οπότε ο καιρός που έχουμε εδώ έξω είναι μια έντονη αντίθεση. Προκαλεί μια έντονη αντίθεση με αυτό. Η Zdenka Sokolíčková είναι κοινωνική ανθρωπολόγος με ιδιαίτερο ενδιαφέρον στα όσα συμβαίνουν στους πόλους του πλανήτη και στις περιμετρικές τους περιοχές. Σπούδασε θεωρία του πολιτισμού στην Πράγα, ευρωπαϊκό πολιτισμό στο Όλομουτς και στο Χρόνιγκεν. Το 2010 ολοκλήρωσε το διδακτορικό της με θέμα την περιβαλλοντική ηθική και άρχισε να εργάζεται ως διδάσκουσα στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Hrádec Králové στην Τσεχία. Από το 2019 ως το 2021, ως ερευνήτρια του Τμήματος Κοινωνικής Ανθρωπολογίας του Πανεπιστημίου του Όσλο, υπό την επίβλεψη του Τόμας Έριξεν, διεξήγαγε επιτόπια έρευνα στο Αρχιπέλαγο Svalbard. Καρπός της έρευνάς της το βιβλίο The Paradox of Svalbard, για το οποίο θα συζητήσουμε σήμερα. Η ζωή της εκεί αποτέλεσε αντικείμενο του ντοκιμαντέρ «Οι Επισκέπτες», σε σκηνοθεσία Βερόνικα Λίτσκοβα, που προβλήθηκε χθες το βράδυ. Η Zdenka συνεργάστηκε με το Αρκτικό Κέντρο στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Χρόνιγκεν πάνω στο θέμα της περιβαλλοντικής μνήμης του Σβάλμπαρντ και από πέρσι πάνω στο θέμα της μη βιωσιμότητας του τουρισμού στην Ανταρκτική. Ασχολείται με την ανθρωπολογία της περιβαλλοντικής και κλιματικής αλλαγής, της παγκοσμιοποίησης, του τουρισμού, της επιστήμης, της μετανάστευσης και της κοινωνικής δικαιοσύνης. Ζει στην Τσεχία με τον σύζυγό της και τους 4 γιους τους. Τον ένα από τους 4 τον έχουμε εδώ μαζί μας. I said we have one of your sons together here. So, Zdenka, it's wonderful to welcome you to Chania, and since you are an anthropologist and part of your personal experience, and your personal experience forms part of your research in a way, could you start by sharing how you traveled to Greece, how you arrived to Chania, and what does that mean to you? What does it stand for?
Thank you for the question, and maybe to begin, thank you everyone for coming, and thanks to you, Yannis, who were so generous to invite me to the festival, so I'm very honored. And when you mentioned that I could come here to present my book, I immediately thought that this would fit into a plan that I already had. So I am a mother of 4 sons, and when you have in the family more kids than adults, life becomes just micromanagement of logistical tasks, and you hardly ever have time one-to-one with the child. So actually many years ago already, I had this idea that I would like to show my children what we sometimes call, it's a cliche, but the cradle of European civilization, so Greece and Italy. And I thought the age of 12 might be just right, because then the kid is grown up enough so that you can talk to them about almost anything. They're curious about sights and stuff, but at the same time, they're still happy to spend some time with their mother. They're not too much of a teenager yet. So then this invitation actually fitted perfectly for this trip with my eldest son, who is 12 now. But since this was meant to be an educational trip, where I was hoping that we could spend some quality time together, just the 2 of us, and talk about meaningful stuff, one of the things that I want to show my child, and all of them, one after another, is how the planet lives with human activities and their impact. So climate change is a topic in my research, but it is something that I think often about a lot in my private life as well. And then I thought I'd be happy to come to Crete, take my son with me, but I can't fly there. It would just feel ridiculous to go to a festival, talk about climate change, using a plane, which we know, we have numbers for that on the individual level, of course it's important what happens on the systemic level, what politicians do and stuff, but when you think about yourself, what you can do, we have ecological footprints, each of us, and that's unavoidable, but by far the most we can do is cut on air travel. and that decreases our CO2 emissions the most. So then I thought, I want to do this trip without planes. We live in Czech Republic, it's not that far away, but still the most convenient, supposedly, way would be flying. But I wanted to do this in a slow way. In Czech we say that the journey or the voyage is the goal, so it doesn't matter just to move, you know, from point A to point B, but the travel, the slow travel, is already the purpose of the trip. So we traveled by bus to Thessaloniki first, and then to Athens, and then we took a ferry here, and we're spending our great days here, apart from the sunburn that my son is currently suffering from. And then we're taking a ferry back, and another ferry to the south of Italy, and then we'll explore there, take a night train to the north of Italy, and then by train back home. So this is our plan, and this great stop is just in the middle of the trip.
Thanks. I find always that it's very important in research, I mean, in academic life, what actually draws us to a specific research interest. So the question would be, what took you to the North Pole? What made you move to Svalbard? How was your life there? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what made me choose Svalbard, this peculiar Norwegian archipelago that is very high in the Arctic. It's not quite the North Pole. It's 78 degrees parallel north, so quite high. By the way, is there anyone in the room who saw the documentary yesterday? I remember your face. Okay, just one person. No, two. So it is a strange place that some of you probably never heard of. And the reason why I traveled there to do this research, which was 2 years of ethnographic fieldwork, so, you know, this old-fashioned way, how anthropologists work, that they just pack everything and move to a place, settle down and live there for a reasonably long period. It was a combination of private and professional reasons. So if I start from the professional, in 2015 I met a Norwegian social anthropologist whose name was, unfortunately he died in November, Thomas Hylland Eriksen. And he, by that time, had a big research project that was called overheating. Overheating meaning accelerated change. Probably the first thing that you think of when you hear the word overheating is temperatures rising, you know, climate change. But what was meant there was also fast change in terms of economy, culture, and society. So in this research project, they were studying different places in the world where local communities, we can say, are suffering from, or just in a neutral way are experiencing rapid change. But they didn't have any Arctic case study. And now turning to the private reasons, I was teaching at the university. We had 3 kids, or 2, a third one was on the way. And we didn't feel particularly happy in Prague as a family. We had some issues in the relationship. I started to feel like a burnout at work, and I felt like I have to do something else. I need to grow as a person, and we maybe need to get out of here, get out of the country and live abroad for a while. So then it felt natural. Oh, and one more important detail is that my husband is a polar ecologist. So he's a natural scientist who works in the polar areas. He studies microbes, while I'm interested in people. But he used to work a lot in Greenland, for example, but he knew Svalbard. He knew the place, and he was always telling me stories about, one, how this place, how he loved it, how he loved the landscape, how interesting it was, what was going on in the town of Longyearbyen. So he would be up to moving there with me. You know, this often happens in academic couples, that one of the two is being dragged to places where they have nothing to do. It's one of the two that has a career. But I knew that given that we had kids, we needed to be in agreement. We needed to move somewhere where we would both be happy for maybe different reasons. But Jakub was inclined that he could imagine living there for a period. And so then, knowing Thomas and his project of overheating, I knew that this town will fit this angle, because it's a place that is changing very fast. Climate change is hitting, you can see it within the course of a short period of time, but also the economy is switching from coal mining to tourism and science. And who lives in town is also changing rapidly. So from a predominantly Norwegian mining town, it becomes a very international, multicultural community. Imagine it's a village of 2,500 people, and there are over 50 nationalities there. So it's very diverse. I don't know whether you could find another place on Earth that would be of that small scale, but that large diversity. So I felt it almost was like a petri dish. It's not so nice to use these natural science metaphors, maybe in anthropology, but you know, a very condensed, kind of contained area or space where lots of these large issues like globalization, climate change are happening. So I applied for the money, and I had Thomas Hyland Eriksen as my mentor on the application. I believe that's why I got the grant. And we moved there in February 2019 with 3 kids. The youngest was 11 months.
I guess it would be interesting for the audience to go back a little bit, and since Svalbard is relatively unknown, to go back, and it's an archipelago, 4.5 hours north of Oslo, I guess, with a flight or something. So it is the northernmost habitable, not really habitable actually, but it's the northernmost city or city or town of the world. My question would be to go back and present an outline of Svalbard's history, how it was discovered, and so on.
I'll try to not to tell it in a boring way. So it's an odd place. As you said, it's very far in the north. It's about 1,000 kilometers to the nearest big city in the north of Norway. So you can say, like a 1-hour flight with an emergency ambulance, helicopter, for example. So relatively remote. At the same time, there is an airport. That's why it's a tourist hub. But it was a no man's land, unknown actually for the most of the world until 1596. That's when a Dutch explorer, his name is Willem Barents, he sailed in that area and he spotted this island or archipelago with pointy mountains, so mountains with a very steep point. And he called it Spitsbergen, which in Dutch means, pointy mountains. And that's how it was documented for the first time. It can be that there were some Pomor hunters, so ethnic Russian people, who went there as trappers and hunters around the same time. We don't really know. Archaeologists can't agree on this matter. The Dutch, of course, love to say we discovered Spitsbergen, and Russians claim they were there first, but who really cares? Around that time, the world got to know there is this archipelago. Important is, for the anthropological context, is that there has never been an indigenous population. Unlike in many other Arctic places where you have the Inuit, or you have all these tribes in the north of Siberia, or the Sami people in the northern Scandinavia or Fenno-Scandinavia. There has never been anyone in Svalbard, which is the Norwegian name. Why? It's remote and it's really harsh, the climate. So we don't know whether anybody ever arrived. If they did, they didn't survive, or maybe no one has ever made it there, except for the polar bears. So they discovered it's there, and then the rush for the resources started. So the whaling period was very intense. There are these stories about the fjords that were so full of whales that you could walk from one side of the fjord to the other without making your feet wet. It's just a legend, but it's to show how abundant the marine life was. They managed to kill pretty much everything within a short period of time. When I say they, there were many nations and empires that were interested in the area. It didn't belong to anyone. So basically anyone who had the the capacity could come and grab what was there. So this taking out of the environment was the story or the history of the place from the very beginning. So whaling, hunting, you know, for all the life, marine life, or polar bears, there's reindeer, polar fox, trapping. And then I think it was basically late 19th century, sorry, when rich deposits of black coal were discovered. And it's high quality coal, and it's very easily accessible for the geological kind of character of the place. So then there was a rush to mine coal. And in 1906, an American businessman who's called John Longyear founded this mining camp that was called after him, Longyearbyen. Byen in Norwegian is town. So yeah, not a very creative way of calling places either. And 10 years later, Norway, which was a very young nation by the time, just separated from Sweden, bought this mining town. So since 1916, it has been a Norwegian mining settlement, company town, they call it, meaning the company that is mining coal basically governs everything. They have the housing, they build it, they distribute, they hire employees, they take care of everything there. And then there was the First World War, intermezzo, and many countries, as said, were interested in the area and wanted to grab it, to extract what was there. So there was a bit of like a tension. Potentially it could have become a sphere of conflict. So many nations after the First World War were interested in solving the issue, and Norway succeeded in drafting a document that is called the Svalbard Treaty, which is a document that is by today signed by, I think, 45 countries. I'm not sure now whether Greece is a signatory party or not. Czechia is. Turkey is one of the newest, by the way, signatory parties. China, USA were one of the first ones. And this document says Svalbard is part of the Kingdom of Norway. It is under full Norwegian sovereignty, but the nationals of all signatory parties have a right to access the area and engage in economic activities. So from the outside, it looks like a utopia. It's a place where basically anyone can come, settle down, earn a living. The reality is different, and that's also what my book is about. But this is the governance regime, territorial regime, that is rather unprecedented. I don't think there is a place on Earth that would be the same. There are some that are maybe similar, like Antarctica, but that's also governed under the so-called Antarctic Treaty, but there no one has sovereignty. Svalbard is different in the sense that Norway is the sovereign governor of the place. And that's how it is until nowadays. And, you know, the situation with Russia, the kind of superpowers' eyes directed to the Arctic, you know, Trump being interested in Greenland. For Russia, Svalbard has always been the place that they actually wanted. So nowadays, there is a, let's say, a geopolitical tension in the air that Russia, in theory, could be interested in trying to get Svalbard. And then the question is, will NATO fight for a place that is Norway, but is not really Norway? And that's kind of that's the thin line that I think Norway and also other allies are a bit nervous about, claiming to the media that there is no geopolitical tension, but it still is alive.
In a way, Svalbard, as you describe it in your book, is a miniature of the world. You use this phrase, and it's also to do a sort of a word play. It's a frozen place, but it's also an embodiment of flow and of change. But all this in a rather ominous way. So, can you sort of identify all the different parameters of the test case as you started to study it and as you proceeded with it?
So when I moved to Svalbard, or when I applied for the grant, I couldn't speak Norwegian. So the only information that I had about the place was in English. And the dominant story in English sources is definitely climate change. So you would read in the media, but also in academic literature, that Svalbard is a hotspot of climate change. There is this hype about, you know, almost also these cliches of like the starving polar bear on a floating iceberg. So that's what you would imagine when you gaze at Svalbard from the outside. That was my position before I moved there. So I was expecting this to be, like a destination of climate change and adaptation to it. But when I came and started to do interviews, you know, it happened to me maybe once, twice, and when for the third time I met someone in a cafe, I would shake hands, and the person would say, "So you're an anthropologist, I hope you won't ask me about climate change." I was thinking like, what's going on? What is happening there? And I discovered that apparently there were more stories in town than just the one about climate change. And in anthropology, you shouldn't, if you're a decent anthropologist, you shouldn't impose your topic, presumed topic, on your participants. You want to listen to what they feel like sharing with you. So I just went with the flow and followed the threads where the field led me. And I saw that the people are much more preoccupied with the other layers of fast change, like the economic one. So the coal mines being closed. Why is that? Because Norway is a green nation, likes to promote itself as a pioneer in green technology. It just doesn't sell well to have one coal power plant, which is in the high Arctic, in an environmentally vulnerable area. So basically, we can, if you want to put it in a little bit of a sensational phrase, it was not good for Norway's PR to have a coal mine in Svalbard. So they said no more coal mines. But the coal is the only local source of energy that is easily accessible. So in a way, you could also argue it was sustainable, because you basically can literally grab the coal from the ground. Of course, you need the mines if you want to have a power plant to fire up a whole town, but it's easy to access it. So then, and this again is something that happens in many places in the world, it's not typical just for this one, that these extraction-based, resource extraction-based places, they need to reinvent their identity when they decide to move away from the carbon story. And what they usually come up with is tourism. You know, that's the most obvious thing you can do, is that once the industry is not alive anymore, you invite people to come to see the story of the industry. So that's also what was suggested by the Norwegian government. But there were some unforeseen consequences that probably weren't thought through beforehand, which again is a typical thing, but you see it there on the small scale, which is, for example, tourism generates a lot of jobs, right? Usually these jobs are not taken by the locals. Norwegians are used to high standards when it comes to working conditions, high salaries. That's not what tourism offers. So then it started to attract workforce from all around the world. Sometimes people are surprised when I say the most numerous minorities in Longyearbyen. Anybody has a guess? Who do you think is number 2 in terms of how many people from that country live in town? Number 1 is Norway, of course. It's about 65%. What is the second one? What would you just shoot something? China? No, they're just a handful. Maybe you could come then. Right, in the documentary there is an Ethiopian man as a protagonist. They were the only family in the town. But you're closed in the sense that it's like an odd, like a counterintuitive place. It's Thailand and the Philippines. So people from Southeast Asia, there are about 120 of each nationality in town. And then you have some Swedes, Germans, and then you would go. So these are the people that take the jobs in catering, cleaning, you know, hotel services and stuff. Tour guides, also there are very few of them are Norwegian, and these are people more from Europe, Northern America, sometimes very qualified, sometimes not so much, but English-speaking, young, usually single. So again, you have a completely different segment of population coming to town. And then there is science and education, which is another strategy of Norway, what to do with the place. But science is not a generator of profit. Science is something you have to subsidize. So the only kind of industry, actually tourism is now calling itself an industry, which I think is interesting. It's an extractive economy, but on an abstract level. They extract memories, images, you know, experiences, while coal mining was extracting coal with the hard power. But you still remain in the extractive line kind of thought, taking something out of the environment. So that, again, I think is something happening everywhere, Greece included. But here I had this tiny little village that is very remote. There is one more settlement, family settlement on the island, which is Russian. It's called Barentsburg. And it's 60 kilometers far away. There is no road, so you need a plane or a snowmobile or a boat to get there. I'm saying this just to illustrate, you don't have a neighboring community. It's very isolated in the sense that here we are, but there are many planes coming and going. So as Giannis said, it's very fluid, and the average length of stay is between 4 and 7 years. So people really come and go, and there are very few old-timers. Those were the people that I was very interested in. But to speak to those, I had to learn Norwegian, because many of them were Norwegians.
And since you mentioned the people you talk to, anthropology is a study of people, and you mentioned also the extraction of memory. So in a sense, you also do that, you extract stories. You mentioned that you are open to the stories they need to tell you and not to what you want to hear. What were the main challenges in all of this as you started meeting people, as you started taking interviews, and also in a two-parter, you also became emotionally engaged and entangled with the subject itself. If we were around for the screening, we know that we experienced it. You became part of the narrative yourself in a way.
Yeah, so there were two things, one just professional and one related to the private life of myself and my family. So maybe I'll start from the professional. As you said, I went where the field led me, also because I had the luxury of 2 years. So it was not rushed. I really could settle down and see what's going on and what are the urgent issues that the people want to talk to. But you point out very correctly that, I mean, anthropology at the end of the day is also extractive, or can be. We unfortunately, as a discipline, do have this colonial history of, you know, imposing our own cultural views on people that were just different, and we couldn't really unpack and understand the otherness, so we just imposed our own explanations, very often with a hierarchical take on it. So this hopefully is the past of the discipline, but the past is living in the sense that anthropology tries to be very reflective. So nowadays the standard in the discipline is being engaged. So you no longer pretend to be an objective observer that knows better and that can just describe, you know, and I can explain your culture to you, poor people. But it's more of an engaged and embodied work. There is a good quote, "The research ends, but the struggles continue." So that's kind of like how you should see your work, right? I was there for 2 years, which was a long time, but I knew that the day will come, likely, when I also will have to leave, and I will leave with all the stories that the people have shared with me. And then what? Will I just earn a point in my academic career, sell books, and basically capitalize on what people have shared with me, or will I address it differently? And so I was very aware, I was very transparent about my aims, but I was also sincerely open to actually staying. So there was this period when I knew I had the grant, but if I had the chance, or my husband, if we had found a job that would have allowed us to stay longer, we would have. So that was, now I'm leaning more to the private kind of part of it. So I was from the very beginning, I knew that I should be engaged so that I'm trustworthy, so that people don't suspect that I'm there just to extract the stories, leave with them, and they will never see me again. So I got engaged. So for those of you who saw the movie, for example, that was the issue of a language course, which was unavailable for political reasons. Again, in a nutshell, to make life harder for foreigners, the government decided to abolish Norwegian language courses. But the main working language is Norwegian. So what you do is that you build a higher and higher barrier, and you enforce segregation because you have people that don't have access to services and information. So that pissed me off a lot, and I was very involved in trying to figure this out, do-it-yourself language courses. It was a struggle, and it's a bit reflected in the movie. I must say that in the book, you won't read that much about the private entanglements, because there was this documentary as a side product or project. I saved that part for the film, so it's not so much in the book. But also this involvement and emotional engagement in the place and community life was very much reinforced through the fact that we had the kids. If I hadn't had children in kindergarten and school, I would be much less involved in many issues that, it earned me access to some groups, segments in the population that I would otherwise have very difficult access. So it made my story trustworthy, that I was living there for real. The project's title was Boreal Life, which is boreal like under Aurora Borealis, but also there is the word real hidden in it. So I was sincerely taking up this challenge of settling down and experiencing the challenges that my participants told me a lot of stories about through experiencing them myself, which involves becoming vulnerable in the extent that it also regarded the situation of my own family.
Yesterday, most of us, at least we attended an event on the normalization of extreme right-wing ideas in European, especially European politics. And obviously there is climate change, there is geology, there is natural science, but also there is economy, and there is politics. So one of the things you touch upon is all the aspects of social inequality, of justice and political action. Can you talk to us about the politics of Svalbard, how you experience this, and how, again, they are a miniature of what maybe happens all over the world?
Yeah, so maybe Svalbard is an extrapolated kind of an extreme case of alienation and disempowerment in politics, because I explained to you the regime of the Svalbard Treaty, and it is a strategic, geopolitically strategic place for Norway. So it's basically governed from Oslo, from the capital, which is, as you said, 4 or 5 hours by plane from there. And in Oslo, that's where the most important things regarding what's going to happen in Svalbard are being decided, which means that the people that actually live in the place and then call the place their home have very little, if any, influence on how the town will develop. When I stayed now in Athens, I was hosted by a friend in the neighborhood of Exarchia. And I was told it's an anarchist neighborhood where people want to be involved in politics and they want to take a stake and be kind of part of the public political discussion. I think that's a very natural thing for people everywhere. In Svalbard, it's basically not allowed. It's like it's not being facilitated in any way. There is a sort of local democracy, or what Norway calls local democracy, introduced in 2002, which means that you can vote and there are elected representatives for the municipal council who decide on important things such as how much the kindergarten will cost or whether they're going to repair this road or that road, okay, on this level. It's not about what kind of identity is the town going to have, how we're going to tackle like major societal or economic issues. Those important things are being decided in Oslo. Just the small stuff is in the hands of the municipal council. And in addition, since the foreign population started to grow, which was from the 90s, maybe after the turn of the millennium faster, Norway, or Oslo, I don't know what I should say, the state authorities started to panic, thinking that foreigners are going to take over and they're going to decide on these small things within Svalbard. And what if they gained more power? These are more like paranoid fantasies, I think. But what they did is that they took away the voting right from everyone who has not lived. This sounds very administrative and bureaucratic, which is the Norwegian slow violence practice that I documented in many ways. If you haven't lived for 3 years in mainland Norway prior to moving to Longyearbyen, you don't have a voting right. Because it's under Svalbard Treaty, it's out of the Schengen, and there is no visa duty. You don't need a work permit. This is an important thing. So that's why all these people from Thailand, the Philippines, all around the world can come without worrying about visa, okay? So then all these people that have moved to Svalbard directly from the country of origin have lost their voting right. Like, I don't know if any one of you knows about a different case within Europe where voting right would be taken away from adults. I don't know. I think it's quite scandalous, but it passed without much waves. Many people wrote letters to their embassies, but then on the diplomatic level, who cares about a handful, 20 Finns living in Longyearbyen or 50 Germans? They can be easily sacrificed for the bigger, higher geopolitical game. And here I'm coming to what this actually says in a more general sense, is that if you have alienation and disempowerment in politics and in democratic processes, what kind of sustainability are we building here? Sustainability, there are these 3 pillars: environment, economy, society, but it's sometimes governments look at it as if it were a shopping list. I can pick environment and I can leave out the rest, but then it's not a strive for sustainability. It's basically greenwashing. So that is what I think is happening on many levels in Svalbard, that this green politics, which per se, we are probably all passionate about this cause, but it's not a strive for sustainability because you're just forgetting about the people on purpose because it just doesn't fit in your political plan. So that is, I think, what I documented in the book is this kind of fake facade of sustainability where the environment seems to be apolitical, as if it were neutral, but it's not at all, because the people's stories are deeply entangled in these fights, and once you disregard or ignore the people's struggles and suffering, you can't call it a vision of sustainability any longer, or that's what I argue in the book. It's probably not very well received by Norwegian state authorities.
We met in Svalbard 5 years ago, and I was visiting for a conference. You were part of that conference. Obviously, I had just submitted the abstract for the conference in order to visit Svalbard and not attend the conference. And the thing is, I recall that experience. It was just before the pandemic, and it was actually a magical experience because I remember the moon. It was January. The moon. It was night, always night. The moon was never rising or setting. It was just going round and round and round. And then I remember the absolute darkness inside the coal mine and a drive with the sled and the huskies and everything. I mean, it was an immersive experience. It was an exciting experience. Obviously, at hindsight and in all the sort of experience we had afterwards with COVID, which was a very differently extreme experience at the same time, I thought many times that, I mean, the phrase is also in the film in a way that we shouldn't be there in a way, and maybe that this idea that we shouldn't be there also translates into most of what we are doing in the planet anyway, not only on those extremes. So a two-parter is how you actually experienced COVID as an extreme period within the extremities of Svalbard, and also, do you agree? Do you think that we shouldn't be there in a way?
Yeah, maybe I start with the second thing, because I think you formulated in a really good way. We shouldn't be here in Svalbard because it's so remote and vulnerable. We shouldn't be here on this planet because we're harming it. But then, you know, when you really think about these statements, they're so anti-humanistic that I can't identify with them. That's maybe not so odd for an anthropologist, but I'm fond of people. And when I talk to especially those old-timers, people that have lived there very long, or kids, the longest family history that I met within my participants pool was the 5th generation. So that is, I mean, it's a century. It's not nothing. When you see that there are people who call this place their home, they love it, they care for it, they want to be part of building its future, then I don't think this argument, you shouldn't be here, works any longer. Those of you who saw the movie, I took it without offense when I was told you shouldn't be here. But I would never dare say that to a kid whose grandma or her grandfather already worked in the mine and they have been living there for 60, 70 years. I wouldn't dare. And I think that's basically the same for humanity on planet Earth. I mean, we've been here for some time and many of us care. So I don't think extinction would be a happy ending. I'm not of that sort of a thinker. So I see the point, but I think it seems smart only as long as you don't have to look in the eyes of a person who is engaged and entangled with the place. Then it doesn't work. It just makes you feel ashamed and ridiculous. And when it comes to COVID, so we were extremely lucky that we were stranded in Svalbard during that period, because Norway panicked, of course. What if there were an outbreak? They shipped all the tourists away within a day. They shipped all the students from the university away within 3 days. And those of us who were registered in the population register as permanent inhabitants, we got vaccinated right away. And then we lived happily ever after. The school opened after like 4 weeks. And I was regularly calling my friends in the Czech Republic who were going through the hell of closed kindergartens and schools. And I have a lot of stories from these families with small kids and also teenage kids, how difficult that was for them, people not allowed to go out, who couldn't travel out of big cities. We didn't have that. We were just fine living our lives in this remote and odd place with 4 months of complete darkness when you cannot distinguish whether it's noon or midnight, and 4 months of complete brightness when the sun is just turning above your head. I find that much more difficult, by the way, than the polar night. But yeah, the kids were just fine. You know, we didn't suffer any psychological distress. So that was just a lucky, serendipitous coincidence. But we also couldn't travel. I would have traveled more to Oslo, for example, to the university, to conferences, but did that really hurt? No, it was great. I was so happy to be stuck. We were just together as a family. We spent great time. We bonded, and it is a time in the past that will always be in our memory as a time when we were actually living a slow life that was good and dignified. Yeah, so we were lucky.
As I think we have another 4 minutes before we hand over to the next event, are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you. That will help. Can you use the mic because I hear everything?
I have a question, which about half an hour of your speech, you started answering in many different ways. My question was, what does the paradox in the title of your book stand for? After half an hour, you said many paradox things that you experienced. So let me rephrase that question and say, what's the most outstanding paradox that you experienced?
It's a good one. The most outstanding paradox. When I think about the Paradox of Svalbard, also as the title of my book, I always see it as like an onion, like a multi-layered thing, and you can peel it, and each of those layers is about a different thing. So I guess for me, it is this entanglement of different layers of the paradox. I don't think I can point out just one. Maybe from the outside, the kind of striking paradox is that when you look at the place from the outside, you think it's heaven. It's a place where everyone is allowed. It's being governed, many nations in harmony. Everyone is welcome, and the nature is just stunning. And when you come there, you see that for some it's hell. It's a prison. It's a place where they suffer from bad working conditions, from being segregated, from not being part of a community that they so much want to be part of. They don't feel welcome. So some people are wanted. There is like a middle space where people are tolerated, and then there are some who are clearly unwelcome. So that's maybe kind of from the outside inside view clashes, is that it's not heaven, and you shouldn't imagine it like that. So if someone told me I want to move to Svalbard because it seems like an easy place where to settle and earn a living, I would discourage them, and I would try to explain why. Yeah, but this is just to give a concrete answer to your question. But really, for me, it's the entanglement of all these things. You know, yeah, and a vulnerable place that is melting, we could say, like suffering from climate change. At the same time, you have this last chance tourism, people coming to take a picture of a glacier before it's gone. That's also a striking paradox. Or the paradox of coal mining is dirty. Green technologies are clean, but actually coal is there, and all the green technologies have to be transported, and they have a huge ecological footprint, so it's actually more gray than black and white. You know, and all these things I try to unpack in these 3 parts of the book. It's divided into, the first one is about, it's called fluid environments, so that's about the environmental entrance point. The second one is about extractive economies. And the third one, where I was probably emotionally the most kind of invested or engaged, is called disempowered communities. And that's about the fight for equality and justice that falls on deaf ears of the authorities.
Do we have time for another question?
If it's quick, otherwise they kick us out.
I'll give it a shot. I was really struck by the history of the town. You said it started off as a company town, which has a really striking historical model in the United States, especially in the mountain regions, for example, in Colorado, which were extractive economies built around large companies that basically controlled the entire politics. They had their own currency, the scrip. And there was no real kind of democratic process to deliberate a collective politics forward. And we have an example, for example, the Colorado Coal Wars in 1912 with the Greek Louis Tikas, who was very heavily involved in that uprising. And it was just the model of how to fight back against that was through mass labor organizing and radical syndicalist labor organizations like the IWW. And I'm just wondering, is there any what is the organizing model in this? It seems like the company town model has never stopped to exist in Svalbard, and I'm just struck by the class and the labor models that I'm seeing here. It seems like there are a lot of parallels in early 20th century company towns. You had a bourgeoisie that was largely aloof and sided with the state government and the company. And you had a mass dehumanized working class that had to struggle for its own rights. So I'm just wondering what kind of political organizing model is being activated.
Yeah, good question. When it was just a company town, there was a labor union that worked all right, sort of, then managed to negotiate, better salaries, better housing conditions. But since it's not a company town any longer, in tourism, for example, the workers are completely unorganized. People say there are cultural reasons for why, for example, people from Southeast Asia don't want to get organized in an association like trade union. They're not used to this model of thinking and they're suspicious, so it's not natural for them. For tour guides, it's extremely difficult because they're freelancers mostly. Extremely precarious working conditions, so it's so dispersed and so fragmented that it's extremely difficult to organize. When it was just miners, all the people were kind of, the same and they had the same interests. But with the diversified economy and the cosmopolitan community, you don't have this common denominator that would help people mobilize. And in addition, if there were an effort like that, I'm quite sure that Norway would do all they could to suffocate that. So it's not being facilitated in any way. I mean, the Workers' Party is trying to encourage, but they're quite a solitary pioneer on this front. I think we have to finish, probably.
They're being ominous now.
But thank you, everyone, for coming. If you're interested, there are a few copies of the book on sale. Thank you.